Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. It is April Fool's Day, which is always a concerning day for journalists as we don't know what's true and what's not on the internet. And I am joined by a new guest co-host, Bofta Yimam. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're so glad to try out new, interesting personalities, and I'm really looking forward to what you have to say about today's news.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot going on, and I know you've been working on that radar. So what's on it? Tell us.
Happy to tell you. So here's a big scoop. Vice President Kamala Harris's so-called grassroots supporters on social media were actually paid by a group of wealthy Democratic donors to circulate pro-Harris talking points. In other words, her support on TikTok and Instagram wasn't grassroots at all. It was paid for. Now that's according to a really terrific piece of reporting from my friend, independent journalist Lee Fong, a frequent Rising guest. He exposed Way to Win, a Democratic organizing group that paid $10 million to various social media content creators like Harry Sisson and Kate Abu. Way to Win also paid non-political content creators to insert pro-Kamala messaging into their social media posts. Here was one example. This TikTok user made a video praising, for instance, Harris's selection of Tim Walz. Let's watch.
Bro, who is Tim Walz? Kamala Harris picked him as her running mate. I don't know who the fuck he is, but we're about to find out. Who is Tim Walz? He's the governor of Minnesota, and he's 60. Walz retired from the Minnesota Army National Guard 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery.
And here's another example. This is comedian and actress Ilana Glazer talking about how bad another Trump term would be in an Instagram reel.
So that's our series, folks. We have 3 months left until November 5th. Conservatives have been scheming and plotting for over 50 years to get to this moment where they could have some clown puppet.
To be abundantly clear, those content creators were paid by a Democratic consulting organization to create that content. Way to Win, by the way, is a dark money group, so we don't know exactly where they get their funding. But according to Lee Fong, the group co-hosted a series of events with the Open Society Foundation. That's the advocacy organization funded by left-wing billionaire George Soros. So you can probably read between the lines on that one. Now, conservatives often regard George Soros as a shady liberal puppeteer lurking behind every corner. But Lee Fong writes that what's interesting about this billionaire-backed social media astroturfing on behalf of Kamala is how badly it failed. He writes, quote, "The lofty promises of message mastery, however, often fell short. Way to Win directly financed a series of clunky YouTube shows and liberal identity politics-oriented social media skits designed to bring voters out to support the Harris campaign and Democrats more broadly. There's little evidence that such measures moved any significant numbers of voters during an election in which Democrats lost historic levels of support from key constituency groups. The youth vote, Latinos, black men swung significantly to Trump last year, upending decades of voting patterns. In fact, a series of YouTube videos produced with Way to Win money at the DNC itself received fewer than 1,000 views overall. I can tell you as the host of a YouTube-based show, that's not a whole lot. We don't feel good if only 1,000 people watch. Now, are we still talking about, why are we still talking, you might wonder, about the Kamala campaign's failed media strategy? Aren't we beating a dead horse at this point? Stop, it's already dead? Well, here's the thing. When the Democratic Party dramatically swapped Joe Biden for Kamala Harris, a move done at the behest of elites, primarily Nancy Pelosi and George Clooney, who spoke for top Democratic donors, the media helped manufacture a narrative that enthusiasm for her candidacy was genuine. It was based on grassroots support. Remember Brat Summer and how Kamala is Brat? You have no idea what I'm talking about. Let's explain. As for evidence, the media pointed to pro-Kamala content on TikTok and Instagram. This was taken to mean that Harris was super popular with young people. Hello, my fellow kids. Let's actually flash back to a Rising segment, something we did, discussing this supposed phenomenon.
If you think you are seeing green, you are, because it's Brat Summer, and the green color of the Charlie XCX album, Brat, is overtaking the internet for those of you who don't already know. Memes are exploding all over TikTok, Instagram, and X, and young voters are rallying behind who many of them are calling the Brat, Kamala Harris.
I think it's probably worth reminding everybody that Trump actually won Gen Z voters. So much for that Brat Summer prediction did not come to pass. The media didn't see it coming, by the way. One of the reasons, perhaps, is that they didn't understand that the pro-Kamala content was, in some cases, not all, but some, bought and paid for. It's just such a sad indictment of the state of the Democratic Party. They thought the key to victory was paying progressives to make pro-Kamala memes and not, sitting down for an interview with Joe Rogan, the kind of king of podcasting and by far the most important platform in all of alternative media. Actually, scratch that, all of media, period. Remember that one former campaign official told the Financial Times that progressive staffers didn't want her to go on Rogan even though the offer had been made. Good job, everybody. What a great media strategy. So I take a lot of shots at the Kamala Harris campaign,
yes, you do.
and I think maybe we should move on with our lives by now. But this is just another example of, because I remember this time period. Maybe you do too, where it's like, oh, look at how genuine all this support and enthusiasm. Everyone's so excited that the candidate now is Kamala. What we're finding out is that there were people paid to manufacture that narrative, and that's fine. This happens on the right too.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, it does. Oh, for
honest,
sure.
It's happening. It's happening on all sides.
Yeah, Russian money actually got taken by some right-wing content creators.
Hello,
It
Wisconsin.
happens.
Hello, Wisconsin, and Elon Musk passing out $1 million.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later today.
Just saying.
It absolutely happens. But, don't left-wing progressive media groups track down all that funding and remind people and tell people,
Sure.
by the way,
Sure.
there's an enormous amount of funding to generate pro-Trump, whatever it is, or pro-conservative. Well, it was happening on the other side, too.
Well, look, I think that that's politics in this day and age, and I don't think we're going to get away from that. I think it's probably going to get worse as time goes on. We're seeing it blatantly happening, like I just mentioned in Wisconsin, Elon Musk passing out $1 million to voters and then calling that person their public spokesperson. So, it's getting pretty outrageous in terms of how blatantly it's happening. And with social media, it's probably going to happen even more so. And I do think the call out is important, but then tracking it and making sure that we're looking at the fine print. I think sometimes we glaze over it and we say, this is this person and this is that person when there's more nuances to it.
Well, and looking at the results, if I were a Democratic political figure, a high-level Kamala surrogate supporter entity, I think I would be furious that the money was spent this way for what? For no good at all. Trump made historic gains with the groups of people who are supposed to, this was supposed to be appealing to them. Trump won people under the age of 2016. He won black 18-year-old first-time voters, males at least.
Yeah, I was going to say,
yes.
the black women
Black
did come
women,
out.
not in the same category, but
yes.
they're an outlier now in terms of how well Trump did with the exact kinds of people that supposedly Alana Glazer and various TikTok personalities were going to be, Harry Sisson were going to be appealing to. It did not work.
Well, there were a lot of people we know who also did not show up at the polls at all. There was an apathetic, foundation that we hadn't seen quite like that. Older voters, young voters. We look at what's happening overseas. There were a lot of people who did not come out to vote. They were not interested and they were not encouraged. So, but the good news is that we have on this show today two authors, Amie Parnes, Jonathan Allen, who wrote the book The Fight, which is got some juicy gems about what happened on the ground, what happened behind the scenes, so to speak, in those private rooms where there was a lot of hush-hush planning going on. So I'm excited to have both of them on.
Yeah, that's going to be a really great interview that's coming up later on the show. As BOMBSHELLS says, there's some fascinating details about the behind-the-scenes dysfunction, I would argue, on the Democratic side. We're going to get to that. We're also going to talk about France's Marine Le Pen being sentenced, what this says about her party's political chances. A lot of conservatives, not just in Europe, here in America as well, furious. We'll discuss more Rising right after this. What's happening in France right now is eerily similar to what happened to President Trump on the campaign trail. At least that's according to some conservatives and populists here in America.
A judge sentenced French right-wing leader Marine Le Pen to 4 years in prison and has banned her from running for office for 5 years. She and 8 other members of her National Rally Party, which is staunchly right-wing, were convicted of embezzling millions of euros that came from European Union funds. Le Pen was also fined 100,000 euros, which is about 108,000 US dollars.
Le Pen has denied any wrongdoing. She told the court before being sentenced, quote, "There are 11 million people who voted for the movement I represent, so tomorrow potentially millions and millions of French people would see themselves deprived of their candidate in the election."
Prosecutors say that some of the funding was used for things like Le Pen's bodyguard and personal assistant. 2 years of Le Pen's 4-year prison sentence are suspended, and Le Pen could potentially serve the other 2 under house arrest.
Here's President Trump commenting on the matter.
What happened in France today, Mr. President, Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader, got convicted in court and is now banned from running for office for 5 years. Do you have a comment?
That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. I know all about it, and a lot of people thought she wasn't going to be convicted of anything, and I don't know if it means conviction, but she was banned for running for 5 years, and she's the leading candidate. That sounds like this country. That sounds very much like this country.
Does it? Well, Le Pen has condemned National Rally's anti-Semitic roots and has tried making the party more palatable to the public, and it seems to be working.
In fact, after current French President Emmanuel Macron called snap elections, 140 National Rally members made it into the lower house of Parliament. For context, in 2022, the party had 89 members in the lower house, and in 2024, the party became the biggest in the lower parliament. Le Pen is also a top presidential candidate for 2027, at least until this.
Le Pen took over the party in 2011, you may remember, from her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen. She has tried becoming the country's president 3 times, but has lost every race so far. Le Pen and her party's policies include curbing immigration and giving French-born citizens more state benefits and support.
Many on X jumped on the news. Journalist Glenn Greenwald, for instance, he wrote, Romania banned Calin Georgescu after they invalidated his win. Brazil banned Bolsonaro as he leads Lula in the polls. France now banning Le Pen. Dems tried to ban Trump. The neoliberal establishment solution to being hated is to ban their opponents in the name of democracy.
Even Jacobin, a socialist magazine, doesn't think this is a smart move. They published an article titled, "Stopping Marine Le Pen from Running is a Bad Idea." The outlet continues, Marine Le Pen has been banned from running for office for 5 years. The sentence applies the law as written, but it turns her embezzlement conviction into a propaganda coup for her party.
Senior editor at National Review, Charles C.W. Cook, wrote on X, I'm sure Le Pen was mixing party and parliamentary funds, but the thing is, A, so does everyone else in the EU Parliament. B, the elevation of this into embezzlement is absurd and cynical. And C, the sentence is clearly pretextual and may well be overturned at appeal. And I think that is an important thing to note about this, is that she was not accused of personally profiting from these misplaced funds, rather using funds that were supposed to be used for people working explicitly for the European Parliament to actually, and then that was used for campaign staff. It sounds like an oopsie and a whoops, not a you can no longer run for president when you're the leading candidate. And this is going to empower, Democrats, liberals, progressives, the world over wonder why they're in retreat. And I think this is such a large part of the story. The presumption that they can't win, despite being pro-democracy, saying democracy is at stake because of the rise of right-wing leaders like Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen or whoever, despite saying democracy is at stake, they must resort to anti-democratic means to keep those forces at bay. It will not work forever. It's not persuasive to the American people. Right-wing figures, or if that we're calling them that, are succeeding because they're speaking to people's fears about immigration particularly and some other issues, and you have to if you disagree with those views, you have to beat them at the ballot box. I think this is a huge mistake, even if she is guilty of some technical financial violation, which I don't know specifically about the context of it. Charles C.W. Cook is someone I tend to trust, whose opinion aligns with mine. He says, yeah, she probably did it. Many others have done it. It was not for personal benefit, and it's bad for democracy if the leading candidate can't run because of a error such as this, in my view. What do you say?
Well, look, the bottom line, it was defrauding the public of millions of euros. And I think that when there's accountability, which is what they are trying to do here and what they did enact, we haven't seen that happen here in the United States when it comes to Trump. And I think that a lot of people are looking at this and you're right, comparing it, because even with Signalgate, if we talk about Signalgate right now, they are trying to put it in the rearview mirror. And there's an admission of that. There's a blatant admission, look, there wasn't really any wrongdoing. We trust National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. And there's this idea of no accountability. And I think a lot of people are getting tired of that. And so they're looking at France, some folks in the United States, and saying, finally, stand up to something. You say you're about the people, but you're defrauding them, the public, of millions of euros. And you've done this over years, and it could have impacted, that amount of money could have impacted her ability to run, the success she had, ties with Russia, paying them back. There's a lot more threads to it than I think we're really going into.
But for a political leader, shouldn't the ultimate say over whether they have done something, they have defrauded the public, they have wronged the people? Don't we have an election to determine if that's how people feel about it, right? I mean, even in the American context, while I very much disagreed with not all, but some of the efforts to go after Trump in a legal context.
Well, he has been 2 impeachment trials. I mean,
the impeachment trial was different. I mean, that was the impeachment trial was.
He's been
they had the right to do that, and he was acquitted. You know, he was the
acquitted.
Verdict of acquitted. They did not remove him from office, and for me, that was like, okay, that's that. Then he can run again, and he did, and he won. The people, knowing everything the Democratic Party, the media, and everyone else said about Trump, knowing full well what his conduct has been alleged to be, said we want Trump again. And I don't
lack
think,
of accountability on some of those.
Well,
but
the accountability is the people saying we would rather have this person in charge. And if the people were prepared to make that decision about Marine Le Pen in France, but now they're taking even more extraordinary steps and saying you cannot vote for her because she cannot be a candidate based on this.
They are saying that. That's true.
That seems wrong to me. It seems
philosophically,
morally wrong to me.
Well, they're saying that we want leaders. We want leaders who we can trust, and based on your actions. Well, that's what I mean. That's what the court is saying. I mean, in this decision, that we don't trust you. You have lost any trust. And I'm not in France, right?
Yeah.
So we're not there to say exactly what's happening, the pulse of the people on the ground. But I think those who are watching here are saying, well, look, there's some accountability that's being held for leaders, and we haven't seen that as much here in America.
Yeah, but is there accountability for the failed policies of the Macron government? And you're right. I'm not a French citizen either. I wouldn't even say Macron is like particularly my least favorite world leader by any stretch of the imagination. Although I just deeply despise the European bureaucrats who harass American tech companies and try to censor speech all over the place. But I think many people in Europe, in France, feel like there should be accountability for failed policies that have contributed to violence and social unrest in terms of waves of migrants. If you look at public polling, there's tremendous amount of frustration about that. Where's the accountability for those policies, right? But they're not saying, and thus Macron should be ineligible to run for re-election again, right? It's going to be just determined in a democratic fashion. But ironically, that they're the pro-democracy faction, according to the public portrayal. Right. The one saying you can't vote for the other person. That's the pro-democracy faction.
Well, I think if we look at what's even happening in Wisconsin right now, which we'll get into in a little bit, we're seeing that there's this attempt, Elon Musk on the ground, giving out $1 million, causing all this media outcry for that. And then there's this influence in trying to make sure that it's going to impact the House and redistricting and all of those things that go into play. And people are looking at, well, how much of our leaders are actually doing the right thing and having integrity? And I'm not saying that everything she did was poor. I'm not saying that everything she did was poor. But I am saying that I think that just looking at it, it's saying, can we have integrity back? Can we have trust back?
I want that, but do you think those are similarly delegitimizing? Like, yes, Elon is spending tons and tons of money. He is involved. He is, I guess,
buying influence. Buying
is
influence.
Buying influence. I think that's
Russia.
I think that's playing the game, and both sides are doing it. I think cheating at the game is using the legal system to disqualify the other person. Personally, that's how I feel.
And there's been allegations of that here in the U.S. But look, we'll get into that later.
All right,
I know we've got a lot. And
more
we're being
to
told
discuss.
to wrap, so we got to go. Okay.
More to discuss. Coming up, a couple of crucial races for both Republicans and Democrats today, including this Wisconsin race. We will discuss that next. Stay tuned. It's the Battle of the Titans in Wisconsin. George Soros weighs in at $2 million, with Elon Musk tipping the scales at $19 million.
The billionaires are in a campaign brawl over the race for the state Supreme Court justice. It is the most expensive judicial contest in U.S. history, and it will determine whether conservatives can topple the 4-3 liberal majority that has controlled the court for the past 2 years. Now, the race between MAGA-friendly Brad Schimmel and Dems pick Susan Crawford has sent each party into a fury. The race has a total of more than $100 million, setting off alarms.
On Sunday night, Musk held a town hall meeting where he gave $1 million checks to 2 Wisconsin voters, declaring them spokespeople for his political group.
I should say that the reason, the reason for the checks is that it's really just to get attention. It's like we need to get attention, and it's somewhat inevitably when I do these things, the sort of it causes the legacy media to like kind of lose their minds, and then they'll run it on every news channel, and I'm like, I couldn't pay them it would cost like 10 times more.
Trump won the state by the slimmest margin, and Musk wants his candidate to win as Tesla has been under fire in the cheese state.
At Sunday's rally, Musk didn't mention the lawsuit that his electric vehicle company Tesla filed against the state in January over its ban on car manufacturers owning dealerships. That case is now before a county judge, but could make its way to the state Supreme Court.
Another test for MAGA power will be in Florida this morning. There are 2 special elections to fill the House seats vacated by Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz. Gaetz was supposed to be Attorney General, but he could not get past congressional scrutiny and bowed out of that race. Waltz, who's on thin ice since Signalgate erupted last week, left his seat to take that role in the Trump administration. Now, will the outcome be a referendum on MAGA and on the president? These are some interesting races.
Yeah.
It's funny how things have changed with respect to who Trump supporters and his voters are versus who are reliable Dems. I think it used to be more the case that as conservatives used to have more affluent people were conservatives, so they could afford to take time off from work to vote in special elections or elections that are not scheduled at the regular time. What we've now found out is that dynamic has switched, and the older you are, the more affluent you are, the more highly educated you are, the more likely you are to be a partisan Dem voter, and the more younger, working class, the more likely you are to be Republican. So that's a long way of saying that I have some real concerns for the Republican candidates in these races, because these are not elections taking place, on Election Day, where much more people, a much larger percentage of the country knows you just show up to vote no matter what. And so they could be in some difficulty, which is why I think Elon and others are trying to draw attention to this, to remind Trump supporters the importance of installing or maintaining conservatives in these positions.
And if we take a look, more of a 360 view on this whole race, the state Supreme Court, and we look at cases that they decide on, abortion, redistricting, what Elon Musk and what Trump are really looking at is, okay, who's going to control the House? And, the influence that this is going to have on midterms and the next election that we have, the big election. So I think that they're looking at this and they're thinking, look, $1 million for Elon Musk, we know is a drop in the bucket. And they're looking at power. And we know right now in the House, 218 to 213 in terms of seats, and we know that there's just a slight margin for Republicans. And that's what I think that they're really looking at. And then, of course, Tesla suing Wisconsin over the whole car dealership that we were just talking about before we came to this break. But, I think that he's also looking at, wow, this could influence, this same court could influence my Tesla dealership.
Isn't it funny that
all roads lead to Tesla, no pun intended.
Well, isn't it funny that I guess Republicans or conservatives are now the pro-Tesla faction? Up until yesterday, it was Democratic leaders trying to shove Teslas down our throats. So at every, when we're talking about high gas prices, anytime that voters were complaining about high gas prices for the last couple of years, it's been, well, why don't you try getting a Tesla? That's what Jennifer Granholm, my former governor, I used to live in Michigan, would say. Pete Buttigieg would say that. Hey, have you tried an electric car? It's good for the environment. Now liberals are going from Tesla dealership to dealership, setting them on fire in protest.
Yeah, it's what an about face by all things going on, and they're looking at, of course, I think what Democrats and progressives are looking at is the way in which Elon Musk is, this advisor, but not given this role but not appointed by Congress, and then has all of this power, and then throwing all this money toward Trump and the campaign. It's so much, and then the layoffs. And I think a lot of progressive Dems are looking at the layoffs and saying, even right now as we speak, right, and this show's right now being taped, but as we speak, we're looking at public health agencies and so many nervous employees on edge about potentially thousands of jobs being cut. And we have no real tracking system that exists right now under DOGE to tell us, the American public, who's being laid off and what exactly is happening. We've got other outlets who are keeping track of this. So I think when people think of Tesla, they're thinking of Elon Musk, and they don't, it's branding. It's branding at its core. They don't like the brand and what it stands for and what it exemplifies. And to your point, they did like the brand and what it meant just a year ago,
well,
6 months ago.
Just different people like it.
Sure.
It's
sure.
Elon
You're right,
was not a hardcore political figure until the last couple of years.
He rebranded.
He has himself. Well, it wasn't just rebranding. I think he had a fairly sincere political conversion to the. I mean, I can't.
He's got money in
hearts,
government
I don't know.
contracts.
Well,
money. It's money.
I don't think it's just. I mean, he always had
power. It's money. It's so much money in government contracts.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. Yes, but I think. I mean, also he had the experience with one of his many children. Became trans, and they had a falling out over that, and that seems to have motivated him in a socially or culturally conservative or just hostile to cultural leftism. So I think that was a pretty sincere ideological change on his part. Yeah, I'm not being naive. I know he totally has lots of financial interest in which administration is doing what and contracts and all that, but I think he also just became a more politically cognizant and motivated individual over the last few years. I think that's why he bought Twitter in the first place, is to have more control over this useful megaphone for the right. And as a result of that and the money he spent, honestly, I think Twitter was the more important thing versus the money he gave to the Trump campaign. Yes, he's a very prominent, I would say he is the second most important conservative leader after Donald Trump himself at this moment. And that's what his money and his influence has gotten him. Now, you can like that or not like that. Most Democrats don't like that. About half the country doesn't like it. The other half wants to see government agencies fire people who are not essential, to shrink government, the size of these agencies, or get rid of them entirely. That has been a conservative dream. That's something Republicans have run on doing since the days of Ronald Reagan, and yet have never successfully done. For the first time, they're actually doing what they promised their voters they would do.
Okay, one could argue that not every government employee is critical, but one, it's the way in which they're doing it. Sending the email. These are people who have dedicated their lives, who have mortgages.
Sending a what did you do today email? Is that such a traumatizing?
I think that's minimizing someone who's maybe given their years of service to say, what did you do today? I think that's devaluing people. It's also telling people that when you work for the American government, this is how we're going to treat you. You could have a job one day, you could not have a job the next day. The other thing is that
like the private sector.
Well, but this isn't the private sector. The government isn't the same as the private sector. Private sector businesses are looking to make revenue all the time, right? Government has services that are there for the people, which a lot of people I get do not agree with. But there are things out there, many agencies that are out there for public good. So it is different if we're treating it like a private business. So I think that's huge. But if we go back to Wisconsin for a second, I want to take a beat there. I think it's really critical that this is being seen, I think, more seriously in some ways by Republicans, because they see again, going back to the House and the power this could have. But it's also a litmus test for how angry are Democrats right now, because there has been a frustration at the party for not being more proactive when it comes to fighting Trump and Elon Musk. And so I think that Wisconsin, if we look at it, they're going to be looking at, are you really going to get the votes? Even with all the money. We know how critical Wisconsin has been in the past few presidential elections, less than 1% percentage point margins. So I think that there's going to be an overall analysis that comes after Wisconsin where they're looking at, okay, did this really tell us that folks are frustrated, to your point, or not, of the layoffs? Maybe it's not bothering a lot of people outside of the Beltway as much as we think it is. And so I think that this is going to be a critical point where they'll be able to look at this and say, Okay, is the American public really angry, or is this more headlines?
Up next, Joe Rogan has some thoughts about the Trump administration's immigration policy. We'll discuss. Stay with us.
In rare form, the Trump administration is admitting to a mistake. Apparently, they wrongfully deported a man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, to El Salvador due to an administrative error.
As a result, Garcia ended up in CCOT, the notorious mega prison in El Salvador. Garcia's legal team filed a lawsuit last week against Trump administration officials. Garcia's team wants Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to ensure his return to the United States.
The government argued, however, that the U.S. courts don't have the jurisdiction since Garcia is not in U.S. custody.
Vice President J.D. Vance jumped in to defend the Trump administration's move. He tweeted in part, "It is telling that the entire American media is going to run a propaganda operation today, making you think an innocent father of three was apprehended by a gulag. Here are the relevant facts. The man is an illegal immigrant with no right to be in our country. An immigration judge determined he was a member of the MS-13 gang. Because he is not a citizen, he does not get a full jury trial by peers. In other words, whatever due process he was entitled to, he received it."
To be sure, an immigration judge in 2019 granted Garcia protected legal status. The specific status is called withholding of removal, since the judge believed gangs would target Garcia if he went back. Now, a judge in 2019 did determine that Garcia was a gang member based on a reliable source of information.
Per a lawsuit, DHS officials pulled Garcia over in March, arrested him, and then one told Garcia that his status had changed.
Now, there have been other allegations of the Trump administration wrongfully deporting people, but Garcia is the only case where the Trump administration admitted to a mistaken deportation. Garcia has a wife and a 5-year-old child who is intellectually disabled. The couple works full-time per court papers.
Podcaster Joe Rogan weighed in on his podcast on the possibility of innocent people being deported. Let's watch.
Because I think we talked about this with Doge as well. When you do things quickly and you do things aggressively, that's how you get done. But that's also when mistakes get made.
Right.
And I think a human being being plucked out of nowhere and ending up in a country he's never been in a maximum security prison with gang members, seems like a bad thing to happen to me.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
I don't think that should be controversial.
No, that's not controversial at all. And this is the thing, measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
This is kind of crazy that could be possible. That's horrific. And that's bad for the cause.
To be clear, Rogan was not referring specifically to Garcia's deportation, but rather the possibility of a nonviolent, non-gang affiliated person being deported to a prison in El Salvador. So, the administration has said this was an error. The status of this individual is a little bit more complicated than I think some in the media initially portrayed it. I was seeing social media discussion about this. They're saying, totally innocent, father of 3, no gang affiliation whatsoever, grabbed, sent to El Salvador. There are some dueling perspectives on exactly what his deal was. He was picked up initially years ago, and an informant, one of the other people, said that he was with MS-13. His attorneys denied that. It is not clear. I cannot independently make a determination of whether he was or was not. What the administrative action ultimately was that he could still be deported, but he should not be deported back to his home country for a threat that he would be tortured by rival gangs or the same gang. I'm not sure how that would be. And he has had no criminal activity since then, or even had no criminal activity tied to the gang to begin with. So the Trump administration has acknowledged he should not have been deported to El Salvador based on that. They have also said, but there's nothing they can do to recover him having done that. I think that is something, like I agree with Joe Rogan entirely, that should alarm Americans. And the reason we have due process, and I've been saying this to a lot of my friends on the right, is we need due process in order to make these determinations in the first place. Even if you're taking the position that, well, it's only for, only American citizens have these rights, but how do we know it's an American citizen unless you have some kind of process? So I think this should rightly frustrate people. I don't think J.D. Vance's spin on that was his most persuasive tweets, given that the administration already said we should not have done this. The media, I think, maybe did go a little too far in saying that it's absolutely certain he'd never done anything wrong, no gang affiliation. That's from the immigration attorney, which is always going to say the most favorable perspective on his client's behavior. But there's really no doubt that he should not have been deported to El Salvador. That's my parsing of the situation with this individual.
Well, look, I think this is the first case that they really admitted the wrongdoing, but there have been other cases where there have been questions that have been, arising for the process and lack of due process, I should say, when it comes to those at the border. The other thing that I think is dismissed in all of this is just the fear and the trauma that happens within the communities when something like this happens. You have children who are not going to school for fear of deportation. We have seen reports of that, where there's a massive amount of fear that's happening, particularly around the border, where there are families who are worried about, whether it's the spouse, whether it's the aunt, whether it's the uncle. And oftentimes we see multi-generational families who are living with or near each other. And so this tends to spread the fear and the trauma. And so you have this, again, I think it's we used to be, I think, a country where people would look at it and say they uphold process and systems. There's freedom of speech. There's a due process. There's a way in which we do things that is admired around the world. And I think we're losing that when we see these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I support due process. I think it's a slippery slope always. When you start cutting corners, then you're going to run the risk of taking legal action against someone who is innocent or even who is an American citizen or has a protected status. I know there's a tremendous desire among Americans to do something about there's too much illegal immigration, to do something about violent gangs. We don't need MS-13 or Tren de Aragua or any of the rest of them in this country. I think most people are in support of the government taking action to remove those people involved in criminal gang activity, violent activity, to get them out of the country. Obviously, we have a tremendous number of illegal immigrants. We have a finite number of police resources, so let's start there. Let's deport people who
there
are
also
a
gangs,
danger.
I will point out there are gangs that are happening in white neighborhoods too. May not be called MS-13, but there are gangs happening in white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. It's not
Yeah,
just
well, let's arrest all those
Latino.
people too, yeah.
Well, I'm just saying,
Arrest
oftentimes
them
it's
all.
focused on, MS-13, which there is a presence, and I'm not doubting that. But there's also gangs happening all over in different communities.
I think the government should do
Hyper-focus.
more to combat crime, regardless of the immigration statuses of the perpetrators. Absolutely, 100%. And it is not exactly correct it's not that our crime problem is not solely an immigration problem.
Thank you.
Is that what
Right.
you're getting at? Yes,
Right.
it is certainly.
And there's other factors. There's socioeconomic factors. It's not a race thing. There are a multitude of facets that go into it. And I think, this is for some where they're going to say, well, you're taking it too far. But I think when you do things, when you reduce the Department of Education by 46%, and you're talking about, I see your eyebrows getting raised, but here's where I'm going with that. You're talking about children and retention rates in schools. What happens? The first sign of when you see children getting into gangs, it's because they're not going to school.
Oh, I agree with
You're
that.
not getting support,
But
resources.
It
So
wasn't
I'm just
the
saying, we're
closing
worried
of the
about
Department of Education that shut down those schools. That was liberal governance
no,
during
but
COVID.
the support and
That's
the
what did-
resources. But support and resources with the Department of Education getting cut. What you're going to see is increased crime down the
We
pipe.
already saw it. We
Yeah.
saw it when all the schools got shut down because of COVID, was a massive increase in disorder and violence and antisocial behavior by young people during COVID. I saw it throughout the city, and that was a big mistake. So, but that's, to me, that's on the leadership of this city that made that choice, right? I hold the mayor and the city council and the DC school system accountable for that. Absolutely, we've finally begun to bring we had our murder rate it was 3 years ago.
Yeah,
or
it
something
was
was horrific.
Yes.
The carjackings through
Yeah.
the roof. I wouldn't park my car on my street. A congressman lives a block from me. A Democratic congressman got carjacked while in his car. And it was it's right. It's not MS-13. You're right. It's teenagers
and
who should have been in
I'm
school.
just saying we tend to isolate, and I'm just saying when we're seeing all of these things, and a lot of people are rooting for a lot of these cuts and reductions. Just be mindful that a lot of these things are gonna come down in other ways and impact our society in other ways. Because
I want to fire all the people who kept those schools closed. and all the people who advocated for it to be like that.
That's
I
a whole
would
nother
fire
discussion.
all of them.
That is a whole nother discussion. We've got more to get to. Okay, up next, the battle between the Trump administration and the White House Correspondents Association. We're going to have more on that coming up. It heats up.
Stay with us.
President Trump is escalating his 2015 level of beef with the press. He's taking over the seating chart in the White House press briefing room per Axios. The move is part of a broader crackdown on access to the president and White House staff. There has been a move toward promoting Trump-friendly press. Here's Caroline Levitt.
As for switching up seating in the briefing room, it's something we are seriously considering. And we tried to broker a meeting with the White House Correspondents Association board today to discuss that matter. But unfortunately, their president sent out a fundamentally unserious email to the rest of their membership, making it clear that this is a group that doesn't care about press freedom, transparency, and access for all media voices, but just cares about having their monetized monopoly over the briefing room. And I would remind them that the briefing room is part of the people's house. It belongs to the American people. It does not belong to elitist journalists here in Washington, D.C.
The current White House press corps might be rattled, but it's not new. Former White House press secretary under George W. Bush, Ari Fleischer, sought to jog some memories, posting, quote, "The decision re who gets to sit in taxpayer-provided seats in a government building should not be made by journalists. It should be made by the press secretary, as was standard until 2006. CNN's media journalist Brian Stelter added on X, "The press secretary confirmed yesterday's reports and said we're seriously considering taking charge of the briefing room seating chart, which would Bigfoot the White House Correspondents Association." The White House Correspondents Association then issued a statement Monday saying in part, quote, "The most obvious end result of this reported plan is the punishment, not elevation of journalists. It's the same at the Pentagon, where the administration removed longstanding outlets whose coverage they disagreed with for other outlets that did not regularly cover the building." So here's the thing. Look, I don't love the idea of the White House rearranging the seating chart just so that friendlier perspectives are the only ones that get to speak up. I think that's obviously bad, and if Democratic administrations had done that, conservatives would be rightfully up in arms about it. That said, it is true that the White House Correspondents Association is a cartel-like organization that prioritizes the question-asking rights of elite media folks who are disproportionately liberal and progressive. So it was tipped the other way by just letting them do it. And I think I'm forced to agree with Ari Fleischer that it would be weird for the press secretary to not be the one who gets to be in control of that. Now, I think we should hear from a variety of voices, so whatever facilitates that the best. I don't think we were getting a good variety under just the White House Correspondents Association running it, and independent content creators, alternative media personalities, including many of the people whose voices we feature on this show and we've interviewed, have been happy about the changes to the rules because now they get to ask questions in the briefing room. So that's good, but yes, it should not just be only friendly people asking questions.
Well, I've been in the briefing room before, and you can ask questions, and it's often the person who's at the podium who's going to call on you.
Yeah.
So that's number one. So you do have to be a little bit vocal, right? And make sure that
But how close you sit matter, it's
Sure, how close you sit matters, but I think
it's kind of a juvenile
what
thing.
we
That's
often
just true.
See, well, right. But what we often see is that legacy media has the ability to have the resources, the cameraman who zooms in on their reporter, who then we see that played over and over again. And so oftentimes that's what you're going to see, because a lot of people are not always watching independent media, but they are watching sometimes legacy media, and that's what they see. So it looks and appears that only the legacy media got to ask questions, but actually that's just what was played on their air because it was their reporter. So I'm just giving another perspective to it. The White House Correspondents Association, an independent media can, and I've seen it. I've seen folks from all over the world who have come in, especially during election time and seasons where there's a lot of political upheaval or conversation. I've seen people that I didn't recognize who were coming into the briefing room.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I think that's another perspective, is that you can ask questions. It's just who's capturing your questions and how often is it played and on what media channel is it played. That's my point.
What the Trump campaign understood much better than, this was the theme of my monologue today, what they understood much better than the Kamala or Biden campaigns is the importance of independent media, that not everyone is just watching TV and getting their news from cable news from legacy media or getting their news from the newspapers. An increasing large number of Americans, particularly younger Americans, are listening to 3-hour podcasts or getting their news on TikTok or getting their news on other social media platforms or getting some variety therein. Now, of course, the social media platforms include clips from the legacy media too. So it's this whole stew with a lot of ingredients in it that we're all eating for dinner. And that is fine, and that is good. And I think the collapse of some of the gatekeeping that was done when it was just a handful of media organizations is a good thing, but they also have their role to play. And there should be tough questioning from all sides, tough questioning of the people in power, whether that be Republicans or Democrats.
Well, that's where I disagree. I think that there wasn't gatekeeping. You could apply to come into the briefing room, and there's a process in doing so, and there's security clearances because it is the White House. So I don't think there was gatekeeping. I just think what was captured and played, as you mentioned, over and over again on social was something from legacy media, and they're zeroing in on the reporter's face, and they have extra camera crews potentially there. They have the ability to really get this out there. Independent media could still apply. I think what we're seeing here is control and pressure. Like you said at the very top, if you're disagreeing with the administration, they're going to find a way, and this is one of the ways that they're doing it. We saw it with the way they treated the pool and the AP and Mexico and the different names, and so we see this.
Yeah, I didn't agree with them on that. I thought that was a little silly.
I just think that there's another perspective to it, and there's a process, and this is the White House. You are not just walking in there without a security clearance. This is
nobody's saying they should be walking in without a security clearance.
But there's a process, is my point, and sometimes it comes across as we should just let everybody. Well, we should, but there also has to be some checks and balances because this is the White House, and there should be a respect and a process and a system for getting into the briefing room. But I agree, independent media should be there, and there's a process.
There has to be a process because it's a physical space that has a finite amount of room in it. So there has to be some decision for who's going to be in the room, obviously. The question becomes, do you trust the White House Correspondents Association
How about
to
you
make
trust
those
the person
determinations?
at the podium to pick on people?
Well, yeah, well, that's the
that's
system we're going with.
Well, that's the key, I think. You've got to call on people who you don't recognize.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
If I'm in there, I'm going to be waving my hand.
I know you will.
Really aggressively.
I know.
So they'll,
You're going to wear that green tie, make sure everyone notices.
No, I'm usually not there because they often do this at the same time we're filming the show. So I haven't been there in quite a few years.
We're going to get you in there, Robby.
Maybe we'll get me in there. Coming up, we will interview the co-authors of the bombshell new book, Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. You will not want to miss that conversation. Remember when Democrats were furious with Republicans for saying that Biden's cognitive abilities were not up to snuff? Well, it was much worse as top aides feared he could actually die in office, and they started prepping for a replacement as early as 2023. According to the new bombshell book, Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House, authors Amie, Parnes, and Jonathan Allen detail the race for the Democratic nomination in 2024 and much more.
The book blows the cover off inner secrets, including then Vice President Kamala Harris begging Biden for his swift endorsement once he stepped away.
Daily Caller White House correspondent Reagan Reese posted an excerpt on X, writing an aide to former Vice President Kamala Harris carried a spreadsheet of Republican federal judges Trump hadn't appointed, so if Harris needed to be sworn in on short notice, it could be from someone seen as more credible to Republicans. They wrote. Her reaction was, is right. Joining us now to reveal more from their already best-selling book. I have it right here. Check it out. Today are Amie Parnes, a senior political reporter with The Hill, and Jonathan Allen, senior national reporter for NBC News. Love having guests in studio always. It is so much more fun. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's start with the big, one of the scoops I saw from your book being discussed on social media, that Democrats were seriously preparing a what-if scenario if Biden, couldn't make it to the finish line?
Yeah, the DNC was preparing for the inevitability of what if this happened. As we just noted, Jamal Simmons, who was Kamala Harris's communications director, carried a spreadsheet with him every time he traveled. He had this idea. He thought that that moment should be validated by a Republican judge, that it would be worth more, if you will, to Republicans. And so I think that that's sort of how a lot of the planning came to be. And this is all stuff that we reported first in this book.
Jonathan, I think one of the biggest questions, not just among the media commentary class, but just the American people, is like, who knew? At what level did you have to be? Clearly, the press secretary and the vice president had to have some knowledge of Biden not being as capable of answering questions or knowing where he was or whatever it is. How far down the list of Democratic officials does that go? Were you able to get insights into how senior he had to be to know? Because all those people even deny that they kind of knew anything, right? That's the.
You're absolutely right. Who knew what when? The age-old question. And we do get some answers here. Part of this is a little bit of a frog boiling in water, right? Mm-hmm. That there's not. For people who see him every day, it's not as dramatic of a shift as it is for people who see him once every couple of months. But there was a cocoon around him of top people who really didn't allow anybody else in. The First Lady, the White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients, the senior advisors to Biden, Tom Donilon and Mike Ricchetti. Those guys, Steve Ricchetti, those guys kept him from view of even a lot of other White House officials. What Amie and I report in this book for the first time is a number of episodes where people who were the second tier out or the third tier out started to notice serious problems with Biden. Eric Swalwell, the congressman from California, who had run against Biden in the 2020 Democratic primary, goes to the White House in the summer of 2023, and he's talking to the president, and it becomes clear the president doesn't recognize him. Swalwell has to cue him.
Well, he's a kind of forgettable, standard issue Democratic white guy. No.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I feel like most people who pay a modicum of attention to politics know who Eric Swalwell is. He's on TV every once in a while. And certainly the guy that ran against him, Joe Biden, would know who he was, or should have known who he was. There was an episode also in 2023, Biden gets up and wanders off the set in the middle of an interview with Nicole Wallace on MSNBC. Right. The interview kind of wraps, but she hadn't gone to commercial yet, and he just gets up. It'd be like if I just got up and kind of wandered off here.
We hope you don't do that.
Later that day, so people noticed that, and that went viral. Later that day, there's a fundraiser at this posh New York hotel, and Biden is speaking to donors, and he just freezes. And one of the people who attended that event, it was confided to us, thought to themselves that, he might die. This is not in a good place. So there were certainly indications to a lot of people that there were problems. And I think the closer to Biden you got, the more likely you were to know that there was something wrong with him, and the less likely you were to talk to anybody else about it.
There were other details too. When he went to a small fundraiser, fluorescent tape on the floor to guide him where he needs to go. On foreign trips, there's a makeup artist who comes in first thing in the morning to kind of liven him up and do his makeup ahead of these meetings. He wasn't doing television, he was going into meetings. The first thing was to bring in this makeup artist to help him. And all of this we reveal in the book for the first
Fluorescent tape?
Yes. And,
to show him where to go at a fundraiser at Governor Phil Murphy's house. So a small place, and it's like fluorescent tape on the floor pointing him where to go in a house. And when he goes to speak to the donors outside, he's got a teleprompter, he's and a podium, in this small patio area. That night they go in for this private dinner, and he's talking about Ukraine, and he's kind of making sense, and then he starts trailing off. And this happens repeatedly, where he's kind of doing well and then trailing off. And finally, Biden sort of realizes what's going on himself and says, you guys don't want to wait anymore for your dinner. I guess I'm gonna shut up now. But you have to read the book to get all of the episodes. Otherwise, we could take up the next 24 hours on Rising.
How early, I'm curious, did that fluorescent tape type of instance, how early was that? Were we talking about, 2 years ago? When did that type of, because I sense a lot of fear and anxiety from his team and from those close to him when I was reading that, and I thought there was a whole groundswell of what is going to happen if, and that's That's a lot of pressure on the team themselves.
Yeah, and we report in this book, it was happening much earlier. In 2022, for example, there was an instance where he's guiding a group around the White House, and he's showing them into like weird, obscure places like the locker room, and he's asking, do you want to go outside? And Jill Biden's like, no, they don't want to go outside. So we review.
A lot of protection.
There is a lot of protection going on.
And in that case, Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House, was with him and sort of decided as he's wandering around with the president, and it's actually the family of the late Jackie Walorski, a congresswoman from Indiana, who President Biden had mistakenly shouted out to at an event after she had died. He said, Jackie, where are you, Jackie? And so then he invited her family as kind of an apology to the White House. So they're wandering around the White House grounds, and McCarthy is thinking to himself, I have to like play staffer here and manage the president and kind of make sure he gets back inside okay. And he goes out to his car that night, McCarthy, and he's sitting in his car and he's thinking, my God, this guy has lost it. This is so sad for the country.
So let's move forward to the most probably consequential presidential debate that has ever taken place. And the American people are watching it. They're seeing for the first time, some of them, how bad it's gotten for Biden. How does the campaign staff react internally? Is it a slow burn of, well, that went worse than we thought, or but because they're so proximate to him, they like it's the frog boiling in water, or are they like, crap, it's all over? How did they react?
It was a slow burn for them, but everyone else within the Democratic orbit was going crazy. We take you inside Nancy Pelosi's living room. She's sitting there fielding texts from all kinds of people, donors, lawmakers. Donors and lawmakers are on their own chains, like going crazy about what's happening. They can't believe what's happening in front of their eyes. We take you inside Jim Clyburn's living room. He's sitting there having a drink alone. All of these lawmakers watching alone. It's almost as if they knew that a train wreck was about to happen and they couldn't all convene together.
Because normally they would be at a debate watch party.
Right.
But all of these senior Democrats are just sitting at home watching alone. They can't bear the thought of being in a public place where they're going to have to defend whatever comes out. And then Joe Biden comes out, and it's much worse than they even thought it might be.
Yeah.
As far as his campaign staff, I mean, I think they were in denial. They're all getting hit with the same kinds of text messages, just people freaking out. And their job, as it has been all along, is to protect Joe Biden. And so they go out there with their talking points, pretending that something normal had just happened, or, it was a bad night. It's the kind of thing they said. He had a cold. I mean, we all watched that debate. Joe Biden was not capable of debating or engaging in a coherent way with President Trump.
And I think one of the things that you all really mention in the book is Harris and her attempt to distance herself from Biden, but trying to do that dance. And then we get to election night, and then looking back, is there a regret in how that was handled? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think she and the president sort of had an agreement. He told her right before the presidential debate against Trump, no daylight, kid, and we report that for the first time. Her aides had a different sort of agreement with his aides. They said, you can do what you need to do, you can distance yourself a little bit, but I think the two principals themselves were very much under an agreement that they would not move away from one another, and that did hamper her in a lot of ways, as we all know. And I think looking back in retrospect, she gets a lot of blame for not doing that. And for, we all saw this moment on The View, for example.
Yes, that's the moment where it became so clear, where she says, yes, there's nothing I would have done differently.
Exactly. And that was a moment that was planned. They had rehearsed it. Meanwhile, her aides are kind of, backstage screaming about it. And no one really knew how that moment happened.
Did she think she was going to win, that she was running a successful, this media strategy of not distancing from Biden, not doing, she's taken a lot of flack now that we've seen the importance of alternate media platforms and ecosystems for Trump's appeal. Did she think the playbook she was running of just, I'm a different human being than Joe Biden, but I agree with him on everything, and I'm doing friendly media, I'm doing a couple kind of made to look genuine podcasty type appearances that are not resonating well? Did she think this was going to result in her winning?
So the short answer is yes.
Wow.
She believed going into Election Day that she would win. Her campaign team told her that she was poised to win, even though their last analytics look at the race had her losing, but they had poised her, put her in the place where she thought she was going to win. David Plouffe, her senior advisor, was going out telling everybody who would listen that she was going to sweep all 7 swing states. When you talk about, did she think things were going right? I think what we found in reporting this book, I think what we concluded in reporting this book is that she didn't necessarily know any better. She's never run a national campaign like that. She had run in the primary in 2020 and
with that
been knocked
timeline,
out, right?
Yeah.
Short timeline. She's basically pushed into keeping Biden's campaign team in place, because what are you going to do? Rip up the entire campaign structure in July? That has a cost to it. So she ends up keeping them in place. And there are ways in which you can distance yourself or show some daylight between the previous guy and yourself. And one of those ways is having a different agenda. Well, she took that off the table, right? She's not able to say how she would do things differently. Then you're sort of left with, what's the character difference between these people and what's the record difference? Well, the record difference is she has the same record as him in the White House, and before that she had a much more liberal record in California, and we see that with the trans ad that was so effective for the Republicans. So now it's down to, I'm a different person than Joe Biden. You even heard her say that in a debate, right? How are you different? Well, we're different.
I'm literally
people.
different. Different molecules compose my body.
And different backgrounds and different family structures.
Sure.
And obviously different race. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but did she do a good job of?
But I think when she does, she has always said she doesn't want to be judged on race, gender, those kinds of things. But when she's left making that the only difference between her and Biden, in some ways it runs the risk of reducing her to those things, as opposed to the substantive difference on agenda and record. So I think she gets left running, only on the only contrast she has with Biden is those personal things. And I don't think that was right for the moment, where so many Americans were worried about their pocketbooks, right? Or in my case, a wallet, and in the kid's case, a paper clip holding together a couple cards and $1 or $2.
Let's talk a little bit about the Trump side of all of this. It seemed like they were kind of upset initially when, like, I thought we were running against Biden. They swapped him out. They can't do that. That's not fair. We were ready to beat him. How did they adapt to Kamala Harris being the candidate?
There was a little bit of panic going on right at that moment. Because you're right, they were winning. The reason why they had that debate earlier, the Biden-Trump debate, was to change the trajectory, because Trump was winning in polls. Turns out they're not winning anymore. It feels like it has shifted in Kamala's favor. And so he is wondering if he needs to start shaking things up, if they've gotten too comfortable. And so we report a lot about that in the book. There is a chapter with a curse word, which I won't mention on air.
This is YouTube. You can say whatever you want.
It's called
Awesome.
And we go into how there was on one side and on the other side.
Yes.
Former President Barack Obama, you touch on the delayed really support for then Vice President Kamala Harris. Talk a little bit about what that meant and the time delay and how much of an impact that did have.
So a couple different things here, right? One is certainly on Obama's part. She wants him, once she's the Joe Biden picked candidate, once Biden gets out on that Sunday, she wants Barack Obama to come in behind her. She's got to lock down the delegates. Joe Biden has now basically released his delegates, and she has to go get them. Otherwise, somebody else might. They could have an open convention, mini primary open convention, and that's what Barack Obama wants. So she talks to Obama that day, and he is not ready to give his endorsement yet. And it ends up being a couple days later, a few days later, the end of the next week, they put out this like cringy video. There was a whole miscommunication about why they were doing it on video instead of a statement, and the Obama people thought that's what Harris wanted, and the Harris people thought that's what Obama wanted, and it turned out that Biden's old campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, who is now running the Harris campaign, wants more money. And they're like, we can do viral clips and get some fundraising out of this, because donors had choked off the Biden campaign in order to try to get him out. So they're hemorrhaging money, they're trying to make payroll, and they're like, we'll do a video. But the Obamas didn't want to get on video, and Harris didn't want to do a video with them, and so you get the product that you got. But the other part I want to say, sort of in the same vein, is when Biden gets out, we take the readers inside the vice president's residence, and he calls her to say he's getting out, and she says, are you sure? And he says, I am sure. And then she says, are you going to endorse me? And he says, you got my support kit. And she's like, no, that's not, I need your endorsement. You know, I am your vice president. You told everybody else I was the next best person to be president. If you don't endorse me and do it quickly, it's going to look like,
It's going to look bad.
It's going to look terrible.
Bad, terrible, yeah.
And so they actually, and this has never been reported before, they actually had 2 phone conversations because she had to plead with him to make a quick endorsement. And he was like, it's a Sunday, he's like, I'm going to wait till like Thursday. Because what he wanted to do was take kind of a victory lap and say, I am this great patriot for the good of the country. I'm stepping aside from, you know, we heard what he said from the White House later. He wanted to have several days for that to like percolate and bask in the glory of his, you know, what he saw as his very selfless decision. I don't think anybody else really saw it that way, but he saw it that way. And she's like, this is a political disaster for me. Yeah. So they have 2 phone calls. Finally, she gets him to agree to endorse her on the same day, but he's still like, I'm going to do one statement getting out, and then later I'll do a statement endorsing you. And you know, in the half hour or so between those 2 things, everybody in our business is like watching, going like, why the hell didn't he mention Kamala Harris? It's like, is he going to go rogue? And then she finally gets his endorsement, and then that sort of pushes her forward to be able to go
but
lock down all the rest
there's all this resistance. There's all this resistance, it sounds like, for the time pressure was there. That it's time sensitive. And did we even, you know, you talk about Michelle Obama. You just talked about key players who didn't right away jump in. And so what was the main threat? What was the holdup?
So I think there are a couple of things. I think there were a lot of people at the senior level of the Democratic Party, whether you're talking about Barack Obama or Nancy Pelosi. I can't speak to Michelle Obama as much as Barack Obama, but they tend to move in tandem on politics, who didn't think that Harris was the best choice to run to be the presidential candidate. On the other hand, it is unfathomable to me, knowing what I know about the Democratic Party, that if Joe Biden got out, that the Democrats were going to skip over their vice president, the first black woman to be vice president. You've got a party that, you know, where the delegates themselves were pledged to Biden. She was his wingman, his, you know, his sidecar for this whole. There was just no way they were going to skip over her. And here's Obama, and he's still thinking, even as Biden gives this up, he's like, I'm going to get an open convention out of this. I'm going to get somebody other than Kamala Harris, to the point that he had set up a call with Jim Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina, for 5:30 p.m. that afternoon. And Clyburn is watching all this stuff go on. Biden calls, says, I'm going to get out. Clyburn says, are you endorsing Harris? Or there's nothing about Harris in your statement. And Biden says, yeah, I'm going to leave my statement as it is, but you know, I'll endorse her later. So Clyburn is like, I got to get my own statement out fast so that I've endorsed her before I talk with Obama, because he's going to try to rope me into some sort of open convention. So they eventually get on the phone at like 5:30, and Clyburn's like, I already endorsed her. You know, done. It's done. It's over. I've already endorsed her. We all need to get behind the vice president, or the party's going to be torn apart limb from limb. That conversation lasted less than a minute.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
It is really incredible.
So many nuggets.
Yeah, the extent to which this course of action was destined to take place, going back to what Biden's decision to run for re-election in the first place, despite, you know, giving the impression that he might be a one-term president. Let's put the book on screen one more time. It is Fight. It is so good. Thank you both so much for being with us. We really appreciate it, Jonathan and Amie. Up next, conservatives are turning against one of their own. We'll tell you who that is. Stay with us. President Trump is someone who values loyalty, and one beneficiary of his enthusiasm for that loyalty is Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime Trump ally. Now, President Trump had this recently to say about the Carolinian. Senator Lindsey Graham is working incredibly hard for the people of South Carolina, a state I love and won big in 2016, 2020, and 2024. Lindsey has been a wonderful friend to me and always has been there when I needed him. Senator Lindsey Graham has my complete and total endorsement for re-election. He will not let you down. Everyone in South Carolina should help Lindsey have a big win next year.
But Trump received some unusual backlash for this endorsement. Retired Army Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who very briefly served as National Security Advisor during Trump's first term, wrote on Truth Social, "Not someone I can get behind. I'll go to the gates with you, but I won't take one step forward with him."
Conservative commentator Sean Farash tweeted, "Sorry, I am not with Trump at all on this one, not one bit." And town hall columnist Scott Moorfield also chimed in, writing, Trump endorsing Lindsey Graham in a state where an eggplant with an R beside their name would win, with the promise that he will not let us down, no less, while at the same time castigating real non-rhino conservatives like Chip Roy, Bob Good, and Thomas Massie, just shows that while we appreciate how he's running the country, his endorsements should be taken with a heavy grain of salt. So Lindsey Graham, yes, is someone who has more than an alliance, a friendship with Donald Trump, and so I'm not surprised at all that Donald Trump has endorsed him. But Lindsey Graham is not popular with some in the MAGA base because he is much more of a pro-military intervention, neoconservative. He wants he's advocating for a greater military conflict with Iran. That's how when he ran against Trump. Remember, he was one of those 8 million Republican figures back in 2016.
They had some not so kind words for each other.
Yes, and it was about how
now.
Trump could not be trusted on foreign policy. Yeah. That was the thrust of his criticism. And people like the tweets we just read, they remember that.
Yeah.
So I think it's exactly as Scott Moorfield put it. MAGA is with Trump totally, completely, utterly. That doesn't mean there aren't disagreements over personalities, mentioning people Trump has targeted like Chip Roy and Thomas Massie in the past who are principled America First conservatives who Trump has been frustrated with, even though they're 98% in support of his agenda. In fact, they're so in support of his agenda they think sometimes he has surrounded himself with people who are not on board the agenda. It's about being America First. Is Lindsey Graham America First? I think you could certainly get a candidate in South Carolina who's even more America First and would make MAGA happier, but I don't really see a challenge to Lindsey Graham given that he does have Trump support.
Well, and he strikes me as more of like a fair weather fan, depending on what season Trump is in. We saw after the January 6th riot, that emotional public display from Lindsey Graham really, saying that, this wasn't the direction of the country, so to speak. And so we saw him going against Trump. But then when it seems that Trump seems to come out on top, there you have Lindsey Graham right there, ready to kind of cash in on that. So I think Trump knows that, and I don't think that they're probably besties. I don't think that they're friends. I think they leverage each other. When
they are kind of friends.
You think so? Well,
they're kind of besties now.
Well, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? But I will say that maybe now, but it's so quick to change depending on if Trump is on top. Mm-hmm. If once Trump wins things, you see Lindsey Graham right there. Mm-hmm. But and that's why I can see how some on the right would say we don't trust him because we don't know. There was name calling that happened in 2016. Trump was calling him an idiot, and he was calling him something else that I won't say on air here. But he was. Well,
yeah, Marco Rubio did that. His own vice president said he was a fascist or something. Like it's done.
Senator John McCain. So yes, you go. Yeah. But I'm just saying, if you look at their history, it's quite dysfunctional. If you were looking at it from a friendship. Like, that's a dysfunctional friendship.
Well, sometimes you can have dysfunctional friendships.
Do you have dysfunctional friendships, Robbie?
No.
Robbie, come on. Well, come on. You don't need dysfunctional friendships.
You can have arguments with friends and things, but,
yeah.
It comes
and
goes.
But you know what? If you have enough arguments and if they dig deep too much, you're going to say, you're still cool. You're invited maybe to the barbecue, but maybe you just stay for a little bit.
I'm used to having... lots of arguments on the show with people I otherwise like and respect in real life, so it's par for the course for me, I guess.
That's different when you're a politician, though. Come on, and you're Trump, Lindsey Graham. I think that they just leverage each other. Mm-hmm. They leverage the friendship for what it is, and they understand politics.
Yeah.
That would be my take.
Trump's absolute bestie is Elon Musk, so there's no room.
For now,
that's the best friend.
For now,
forever.
I disagree. I think I think that by the end of this year, we're gonna see a tide turn.
I don't think they can be broken apart.
I don't know.
I think they have something really special.
Really? Okay.
We have more to come on Rising today. Please stay with us. Is conservative media company The Daily Wire going under? There have been some mixed signals. Will Sommer, a senior reporter at The Bulwark, tweeted last week, Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire has been hit by layoffs just a few weeks after CEO Jeremy Boring, who's trying to become a sort of conservative media entertainment mogul, did step down from that role.
A Daily Wire spokesperson told Sommer in part, quote, as part of our ongoing plan to better align resources with business priorities and growth areas, the Daily Wire has made the decision to streamline and in some cases reduce some of our workforce. This decision was based on business needs and operational efficiencies. Our focus remains on delivering the highest quality content and experiences to our subscribers while ensuring the long-term success of our business.
Also last week, independent journalist James Lee had tweeted, "Scoop! The implosion at the Daily Wire is accelerating. What started with Jeremy Boring stepping down has now spiraled into mass layoffs and other firing of senior executive Alyssa Cordova, the vice president of public relations."
This prompted Cordova to respond and downplay the news. She wrote in part, "Oh wow, this blew up, LOL. However, it's fake news. I resigned last Thursday voluntarily, but not with the drama you've been led to believe. I love the Daily Wire, Jeremy, Ben, and Caleb, and will still be working with the company as a consultant."
Here's Daily Wire co-founder Ben Shapiro speaking on this matter.
As far as all of these sort of bizarre rumors that we're in serious trouble. Oh no, everything is yeah. I mean, as somebody who looks at the balance sheet, I can tell you that is certainly not the case. And we are healthy, we are growing, we are thriving, and we have extremely big moves that we are looking forward to making this year.
One of the Daily Wire's big goals was to produce movies and entertainment. Boring had started a project called the Pendragon Cycle, which is a fantasy series based on Stephen R. Lawhead's books. The project is still somewhere in post-production.
The Daily Wire had also announced they were doing their own version of Snow White with podcaster Brett Cooper as the star, but Cooper left the Daily Wire in December of last year, and apparently the project is in limbo. CEO Jeremy Boring stepped down from his role, as we said, and 2 entertainment projects have been stalled. As we just mentioned, senior executive Alyssa Cordova has resigned, and the company is reportedly experiencing layoffs. But Shapiro insists the company is just fine. So this is some, inner conservative drama. I know some of these people, so I've been trying to glean insights into what's really going on, and I cannot tell.
Can I get in the group chat?
You can get in. This is no Mike Waltz situation, so we wouldn't be adding you inadvertently.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what's going on. There have been the acrimonious split of Candace Owens from the Daily Wire is a little bit in the background here. Candace Owens was exited from the company after they perceived, Ben Shapiro is much more pro-Israel. He's Jewish himself, pro-Israel figure. Candace Owens is a very anti-Israel figure, and then some even, I would say. And she exited the company and has a lot of feuds with Ben Shapiro, is talking about him a lot. I think people more in her orbit are the ones saying things are really bad at the Daily Wire. Jeremy Boring has mismanaged it. He's stepping down, their financial troubles, all of that. So that's kind of like a little bit ideologically motivated because they don't like those people anyway. So I can't tell if it's true, but it might be true. And then the Brett Cooper thing, she did seem to share some reservations about Jeremy Boring specifically that I think for her don't extend to the other people at the company. Meanwhile, Matt Walsh is just there like being outrageously successful and hilarious, and even I don't agree with him on tons of things. He's just so good at what he does, and he's hilarious. Yeah. So the company is not going to cease to exist at any time in the immediate future, and it might be fine.
Let me tell you, anytime you put a statement where you put reduction in workforce, that to me means layoffs. That means something on your bottom line probably isn't adding up. Now, he refuted that, and he said that, on camera. We just heard the bite. But anytime I've ever seen reduction in workforce, it does not bode well for a company. And it's a lot of, public statements like that tend to give unease to the people who are working there. Leadership may say everything's rosy, but that's because they know what's coming down the pike and others don't. So I just hesitate to believe everything in that statement because we see it right now happening in government, reduction in workforce. We see it everywhere, and it does not look good.
I mean, I was looking forward to their Snow White more than the absolutely atrocious, abominable Rachel Ziegler version. And the Pendragon Cycle, which you mentioned, books I've not read, but I understand is a King Arthur mythology book series that I love Arthurian mythology. So I would really like to see those projects. Those sound very good.
Well, you might need to write that in. And
maybe I got to do it myself.
Yeah.
All right, that does it for us, I think, today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Appreciate you tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care.